Back on the player season recap game today. Caitlin Cooper is going to join us once again to look at the 2022-23 season for some reserve forwards. Aaron Nesmith, Jordan Nwora, Oshae Brissett, and Kendall Brown. We dig into everything you should know about their last season and looking forward where they could fit in on this Pacers team. It's all coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we're diving into more player season recaps today, looking at some young /reserve/wing forward types, and Aaron Nesmith, Oshae Brissett, Jordan Nwora, and Kendall Brown, digging in to everything about their NBA and, in Brown's case, G League seasons, key stats, key moments, key clips, and things to watch out for going forward. And Caitlin Cooper will once again be joining us to do this. We're doing this for every player on the roster except for George Chill and James Johnson this season. Today's was really insightful. Lots of interesting young guys here who could make an impact next year, but their roles are kind of tough to determine, and we cut through it all. You won't want to miss it. Let's get right to it. We're back. The player season reviews are back. Looking back at every single Pacer player's 2022-23 season with Caitlin Cooper from Basketball Showed. If you missed the first two episodes of this, looking at some of the reserve big men or Benedict Mathurin season, we're doing this in a style called The One, looking at one stat, one clip, and one over-under for each Pacers player to just find their season and look forward today, going into the nebulous land of whatever we're calling this group of players, young wings, backup forwards, hybrids, I think is Kevin Pritchard's term for this role position, except Nesmith isn't really, whatever. The four we're doing today are Aaron Nesmith, Jordan Nwora, Kendall Brown, and Oshae Brissett, which was in a very random order. We're doing them, I think, in the opposite order that I just said. Caitlin, what an interesting group this is. They all have very different skills despite being kind of similar positions.
Yeah, that's why I was talking to you beforehand that I didn't really know what to call this group of people. Some of them are wing-sized, others are not. Some of them logged minutes at the four. Well, I think all of them logged minutes at the four this year, at least in little bits and pieces. So gives us a lot to dive into. And yes, they all have different skills and offerings, which makes them a good group to put them all together, because I kind of doubt that all four of them will be back on the roster next year, so we can do some compare and contrast.
Congrats to Kendall Brown for being the least minuted player we're doing for this, but Kevin Pritchard said they might be interested in having him back next year. He had some interesting flashes. They traded stuff to get him. We're including him. We're going alphabetically this time instead of all over the place. And Oshae Brissett is first, and that was Caitlin's scout. I don't know if that's the right word. Caitlin's player of the four today. I have two other ones. She has one other. So Caitlin, what do you want to start with? Clip, stat, or over under for Oshae Brissett?
I'm going to start with the clip. Hopefully you got the entirety of the clip. We were having some technical difficulties, and mine's a little bit longer. So I'm taking us to not too long from the end of the season when the Pacers played against the Thunder at home and ended up winning that game. And I feel like this is the entire Oshae Brissett experience in one sequence. So defensively is where we begin, and he is off ball. Jalen is switched on to Shai Gilgeous, and Oshae slides over, as he's pretty good at as the nail king, and helps get the ball out of O'Shea's hands and then recovers back to the shooter. And then after that ends up diving on the floor to get the loose ball, recovers it. And then when we go the other way in transition, Andrew Nembhard has the ball and flips it to him at the top of the key. And then he goes in and has one of his kind of patented finishes that isn't really a finish, but gets his own offensive rebound and ends up getting fouled. So I feel like that's kind of all of the lovable things about why Pacer fans like to see Oshae Brissett in the rotation, and also some of what's holding him back in his game. So I'll let you react to that.
The finishing is a big part of this. It's funny, there was a Setting the Pace in an episode last year talking about Brissett, and like they kind of nailed it for me, where it's like every time he's playing, I feel like he's doing all these good things, and he's in the right spots, and he's making good plays, and he's adding to the group. And then you look at his stats, and you're like, what? You know, that's it. That's the percentage. That's the, it's like on defense, he's everywhere. He's defending this guy, he's running out to this guy, he's diving into the plane, he's diving on the floor, and then he misses two layups. And like, I think you were talking about this, I think it's Summer League and even way beyond before that. Just like his finishing's never been there, even when his handle got better this year from at the rim, 56.2% from 0 to 3 feet. Like among all these things he could do well, he just couldn't quite put the play finishing together in a way that kind of made it maddening even when he was at his best.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You don't really necessarily see it in that clip, but one of his biggest struggles as a finisher is his ability to adjust against verticality. So anytime the big is able to stay around the rim, he doesn't really, and it's partially shot selection too. Like he's just going to kind of go in like a NASCAR. He doesn't really have a lot of ability to adjust speeds. And then what should be a layup, a lot of times for him ends up becoming a hanging bank shot because he just doesn't get a lot of elevation off of 1 foot. So for him, the problem becomes, which is kind of, I'll just say right now what my one number is because we're already right there. It's 39%, which is what he did on drives this year. And that's pretty poor. Like he only had 1.2 drives per game, but he's also 42% on overall layups. So his best and most successful play is in the minutes when he's out there with TJ McConnell and he's at the wing and TJ gets 2 feet in the paint and he cuts at the 45. When he's able to, he's very good at not spoiling the spacing and knowing when to cut. That's his most successful thing. So when those are layups, he tends to finish those. I think that his points per possession on cuts is still pretty good this year, but when he's a driver, like it's just not coming. So then that means that his shooting, like his shot has to fall. Otherwise, his game doesn't have a lot of room to grow at this point because of what the finishing is.
Yeah, the shot was when I was talking to someone, I forget who it was, a couple years ago, when he was doing well in the G League before he came to the NBA, they were kind of attributing his quality shooting that first year, that no fan year, to like he was just wide open all the time, right? Because he was in that starting five for that whatever, when he was on those 10 days, and Sabonis and Brogdon, he was just wide open all the time. And then that kind of went away, and then he showed flashes at that summer league that year. I think he only played one summer league game, right, where his handle looked better. He got like 10 free throws up and they just said, okay, you're done. We get it. You're good. But then the three kind of went away and the finishing never came with it. And so, to me, part of the appeal of him is like he's a kind of a low mistakes player, but missing shots, I guess, counts as a mistake, I suppose. But he very rarely turns it over. He's never in the wrong spot or clogging stuff up. But if you can't really finish plays, it's hard to be an additive as much as a neutral on the offensive end of the floor, especially when the finishing's not there, even with an added handle.
Yeah, because the three was kind of all over the place month to month. Like in October, it was 20%. November, it was 35%. December, he was almost at 40. And then at January, it went back to 25. Like there's just a lot of inconsistency there where he's not going to be consistently guarded when that's going up and down. And some of it goes back to the playing time as well. I mean, early on in the season, he wasn't in the rotation. Then when Chris Duarte got hurt, they kind of found a place for him. And they were also playing a lot deeper into the roster. Like there were some of those games where they were willing to play like 11 deep. Then they kind of cut it back. And then when Chris got healthy again, he was back out of the rotation. And then, once they went full development, they ended up being more minutes for him. But I like what you bring up because Oshae is kind of the reason why single game plus minus is so absurd in some respects. Because have you looked at what the single game plus minus was for him over the last 8 games?
Is it atrocious or amazing?
It's you have to do a lot of figuring to decide exactly how it shook out because there was only 3 players with a positive net rating over the last 8 games, and it was Gabe York, and Buddy Hield. And Gabe only played in a couple of those. So Oshae Brissett was consistently in the positive, and in part some of that goes back to the clip because he does make those higher energy plays. He's a high motor guy. But that game against OKC, he was a team high, I believe, plus 17 in 18 minutes played.
0 for 8 from the field.
Yeah, and he went 0 of 8 from the field. He did get to the free throw line, but then when you really drill it down, TJ McConnell was basically making every shot in that game, and he played every minute. All of his minutes were paired with TJ except for one. And that was kind of a lot of the case in some of these games. He was plus 28 against the Knicks, plus 14 in the finale against the Knicks. And in part, that was kind of because they went small with him at the 5 and kind of found something a little bit there when they dug out of the hole they were in. But yeah, I think some of it just has to do with who he was out on the court with, but somehow he manages to have, like I said, high single game plus minuses even when he doesn't make a single shot and has other stuff going on. But defensively too, I'll just touch on this a little bit. What I show in that clip is kind of what his strength is. When he's off ball and can slide in and out from the 3-point line and back out to shooters, that's mainly what you want him to be doing because he still doesn't really have the core strength to be holding up in the post against 4s. And yet offensively, he kind of needs to play the 4. So
Would you
That's
say
kind
he's
of the
the
problem
best
for him
like
on that
help
end of the floor.
slash in rotation defender on the team, or was?
I don't think I would probably go that far, although the bar is somewhat low. I actually think that Tyrese Halliburton has probably the best instincts as an off-ball defender and what his closeouts are. He's pretty sound in his ability with what his length is to close out once, have a fly-by closeout, get back in the play again, and close out again. Chris Duarte, when he's playing at his best, has good instinct sliding in and out from the three-point line as well. But yeah, I mean, for Oshae being a role player, that's his greatest strength defensively. He's still like, there are times where they can maybe play him at the 5 or play him at positions and he can switch out to the ball okay, but I don't think that's ideally what you want him to be doing, and Nesmith was a leg up in that particular department. But there's not a whole lot to cover and talk about with Oshae, so my one over under, if we already want to go there, is just 0.5. And that's number of games played for the Pacers next season.
Well, that's fitting. I just wrote about the fact that he's technically extension eligible and talked about his free agency. I'd say under. I mean, it's not even that I don't think he wouldn't help them or doesn't fit. It's just that the roster spot dance is impossible. You know what I mean? Like with so many picks and space available, it's like someone has to be gone to fit new people in. And since he's already a free agent, it just kind of makes sense unless they get to July 10th, as KP said, and they've traded away 5 guys and only drafted 2, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, you're still available. But I don't feel like the Pacers should be Brissett's priority, since he might be looking for more minutes or more money, nor do I feel like Brissett should be the Pacers' priority, even if he would make sense for them, because they needed to use their roster spots differently. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I think that we're in agreement there. I would take the under as well. And partially because keeping him in the pipeline, like I said, there just doesn't seem to be a clear place where his game could still grow out. And there's also other people already on the roster who can either replicate some of what he does, or perhaps you want to see more from. So Kendall Brown is also a very intuitive cutter, and Kendall Brown's 3-point shot is also kind of inconsistent at this point, but maybe you're a little bit more willing to see what he can do defensively and what else he can give you. Plus, he'll most likely be on a 2-way contract instead of holding, a regular roster spot. And then Nwora just gives you a lot more offensively than you're going to be getting from Oshae Brissett, and we'll get into him later. But that's kind of where I look at it too. I think that I have a lot of fond memories of Oshae, particularly at the end of the Bjorkgren season when they signed him to a contract and when his shot was hitting and he was playing alongside Sabonis. And there was some highlight moments that we'll remember from last year, like the Justin Anderson meme that gets thrown around. But I will be surprised if he and the Pacers are still in partnership at the beginning of next season.
Good player. I always thought he was better than it seems like a lot of fans did. I think it was you who I first heard call him resourceful. I thought that was a good way to describe him as a player. But yeah, that just given the Nwora stepping up, especially down the stretch of this season, I think kind of sealed the deal on what the situation could be. Hey guys, short little break so I can talk to you about Gametime. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over buying tickets for events and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have with Gametime. They have flash deals and last-minute tickets for anything you want to go to. Easy to find and buy tickets for every event in your area. They have images of seat views and the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, and more. Forget planning months in advance. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You can buy your ticket in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're set. They're sent directly to your phone, so you don't have to dig through your emails. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off with Gametime. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Let's also very quickly talk about FanDuel. Grand slams, no-hitters, and double plays are back. There's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockdown and sign up. Place your first bet and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first doesn't win. For example, will Aaron Judge pick up right where he left off last season with home runs on home runs? Will a pitcher go over under their strikeout? Or you build a same game parlay with your favorite matchup of the day. So don't miss your chance to get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockdown to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. And look at you, intentionally or unintentionally making the perfect segue into Kendall Brown, who we didn't see like really at all in the NBA. And what did he end up at? 50 minutes, 40 minutes? Not very much. The worst possible consecutive injuries with the stress reaction, distress fracture. Hopefully he can be ready by summer league, especially because the Pacers potentially, as Pritchard said, would like to have him back. You don't give up stuff to get a guy in the draft and then give up on him after 40 NBA minutes. So we'll see where that marriage ends up going. Where would you like me to start here, Kaylin, with a stat, an over-under, or the clip I sent you?
Hey, let's look at the clip you sent me. Why don't we do that?
So the clip is it's two consecutive. It's from his two highest minute games, one against Golden State and one against Utah. And this stood out in the G League as well. And that's that he is able to guard so many positions because he's very large and very fast. So the Jazz possession starts defending an inbounds, and he's on Malik Beasley, and Malik Beasley fades to the corner, and he just stands still and switches on to Kelly Olynyk, and the inbounds pass is terrible, and he steals it, and there's no point in watching the dunk, but he does dunk it. And against Golden State, he's guarding Draymond Green. Draymond Green's trying to get into a little action with Jordan Poole. The second he hands it off to Poole, Kendall Brown swarms all over him. Like, the Pacers and the Mad Ants all season were comfortable with him on a guard or a forwardy type, not necessarily a big just yet. But I think in general, that is kind of where I think clip-wise you see where this team believes in him and that he can be an athletic defender. And that's a very, unique skill to have and why it's worth potentially investing in him for another year.
Yeah, he has very quick hands in both of these clips because, like you point out, the inbound pass isn't great, but the next play you can see how his cat-like reflexes are. Partially for me, like, he got most of his minutes. I like that you picked. I mean, there wasn't a lot of games to go to, but he got most of his minutes on that 7-game West Coast road trip when they were playing a little bit deeper and they had some guys out of the rotation, especially against Golden State in that first quarter where we got to see all three rookies play at the same time. His issues defensively, he's good, like what you're pointing out here. He's pretty decent on ball, which isn't, a skill in short supply for the Pacers for the most part. But he tends to be a little bit hyperactive. He wants to send help where he doesn't really need to be sending help, and that got him into trouble a few times in that Golden State game. But there is quite a bit of versatility because, as I remember when they played Minnesota, he got assigned to Jalen Noel and McLaughlin. So he was doing a lot at the point of attack, and then they also went into some press defense where I think that they were playing him at the top of that. So to be his size, what is he, 6'9"? To be his size at 6'9" and be able to play him up top like that, and I kind of wonder too, because at the back end of the season, the Pacers were playing more 3-2 zone, and there were a few occasions where when they were willing to play Jalen and Isaiah Jackson at the same time, that they were putting Jalen at the top of the 3-2 zone, and that was a way for them to keep both bigs on the floor without necessarily suffering from that defensively. And I wonder if that's an area too where you could maybe use Kendall Brown a little bit more in zone to really use his length and muck up passing lanes in that way. So this is definitely his top trait or what you're hoping to get from him. So that's a good clip that you pointed out, or package of clips.
The whole last 7 minutes of the Jazz game, he was just pesky everywhere. And to a point that, like, look, it was a blowout. The Jazz third stringers were in, but like making defensive plays and helping the Pacers cut into a lead that they couldn't come back from, but still to the point where like, oh, this is interesting. Like perhaps he can be a pest at his best, but also where you go, oh, it's very easy for a calmer team or an experienced group to break that down. Like balancing that will be key for him. And that also kind of is my stat for him as well. His steal percentage was 4.7 in the NBA. That's really high. We're talking about a very small sample. Anyway, every stat I could have possibly picked for him would have been small sample, but I always have this opinion with bigger forwards that you just have to be able to either defend or shoot to get on the floor in the NBA. You don't have to be good at both. If you are, that's awesome, but just one or the other can get you on the floor. And I'm just really high on his defense because of the speed and athleticism that comes with it. And his instincts are pretty solid that I think if he can read passing lanes, be in the right spots, like that bodes well for him potentially as a guy who could be on an NBA court in the future.
And the steals is a really good thing to bring up too, because he fits into the Pacers pace as well, because he just runs the floor so easily in transition. I think very early in preseason, I tweeted something along the lines of like, he looks like he has access to a conveyor belt that no one else is on. Because it just looks like he's moving so easily. So if he is getting steals, that creates offensive opportunities for the team, especially because he can bring the ball up the floor. He's a little bit dicey with his left if he has to bring it up that way, but he can get up and down, and he obviously can get up, and they can run some lob sets for him, or he can run and catch a lob in transition as well. So the steal percentage, I think that he was at right around 2 stocks, so 1.3 steals and 0.7 blocks. That was that's good event creation from him, even in limited minutes. So the shot is interesting because I remember there was a moment during preseason when they played the Knicks where Obi Toppin was inside the free throw line and Kendall was around the top of the key and he blocked that shot. Like that's how much time it takes Kendall to release his shot that guys really have time to recover out. And even in that Warriors game, like it's not like Kendall was on the scouting report, but Steve Kerr was like, "Hey, Steph Curry, go guard Kendall Brown. Hey, Jordan Poole, go guard Kendall Brown." And that was a convenient hiding spot for them, even in those limited minutes that they played. So that was also something to watch even in the pre-draft process because the one game I was more so watching it for Jeremy Sohan when they played Kansas because Jeremy was playing some de facto nominal 5 against McCormick for Kansas. And it turned out that after halftime, the adjustment that Kansas made was like, oh, we're getting beat by inverted pick and roll from Jeremy Sohan. We'll just put McCormick on Kendall Brown and have him kind of hang out. So at the very least, Kendall will have to get better at being willing to shoot because he's very hesitant to let the ball go. And I don't know how his numbers shook out in the G League. I tried to look at the stats, like how many attempts was he getting up?
He took 34 the whole season in 16 games. Can you see my notes? Because my over-under is 3-point attempts per 36 minutes.
So, no, but we're on the same page. We're on the same page.
He took 34 threes in 16 games, a little over 2 per game. That's full season. That includes the showcase part, the cup, and the regular season portion that he was able to play. He hit 32.4% of them, but like you said, when he's shooting, he's wide open because his load up is so long. Look, I'm not going to dive into his Pacers number. He took 1 3, so per 36 minutes in the NBA, he took 0.9 threes per 36. In the G League, he took 3 threes per 36. My over-under would be 5 threes per 36 for him next year. You can do G League or NBA if you want, but I think that's a huge, huge development thing for him because we know he can cut like crazy and be all over the place.
I'm probably going to take the under just from what I've seen from him. But yeah, like the whole fake it till you make it thing's a real thing. Like at least if you are shooting, you know, against exaggerated game plans, are people necessarily going to care if he's not knocking him down? Probably not. But in it's real time and he's getting thrown out there into minutes, teams aren't in their heads factoring in what Basketball Reference says about his shooting percentage. You're going to react to what he's doing on the court. And that also, like drawing those types of closeouts, because something that we didn't even touch on here, which is something else that he does that Oshae doesn't, is he's a pretty decent connective passer. When he gets downhill, he can make nice little touch passes or find other guys on the move. But in order to do that, he needs to have some degree of a closeout so he can get past his guy and be able to make those types of reads. So that's something else that he brings to the table, but the shooting kind of is key to unlocking a lot of that if he's going to be able to do that.
Yeah, decent passing and rebounding numbers in the G League. Like he did a little bit of everything. They just didn't get a lot of chances to see him. And so I think that's rightfully a guy you keep exploring. Should we move to Aaron Nesmith, who was maybe my surprise of the season, Kalen?
Maybe the unsung hero in a lot of ways. I liked the Aaron Nesmith experience for the most part. Yeah, let's hop over there.
I did not have any expectations for what he could or couldn't do just because his first 2 seasons with Boston were so all over the place. And it's interesting because there's a lot of stuff that I'm like, okay, he established himself in this way and this way and this way, and that's big for the Pacers, but also thinking there's these 6 things that if he was just a click better at, he'd be a much better player, which makes him really interesting to kind of dive into.
Are we doing the clip first?
We can do the clip first. This is the most negative thing I think I kind of dove into, but you know, something with him that I thought was interesting, and I'll kind of get into this with numbers later, is his shot was fine this year. It's not like he was a great shooter, but you know, over 4 per game. They're a little over league average percentage. That's pretty good. When he got run off the line, he did not have a lot of things he could do that were productive, whether that was make a play or finish, and his handle's really loose. So it's just 2 clips that I kind of thought stood out of like he's got space at the top or he's got a poor defender on him and he tries to cross over and the ball's way out in front of him and it gets stolen, or he's driving to his right and the ball's way out in front of him on his second dribble. When he changes direction, it gets easily stolen. Like if he could tighten up his handle a tiny bit, even if it doesn't lead to shots directly, just him having the ability to dribble past a bad closeout or anything like that, I think would make him just a way more useful offensive player, and that he could be a connective piece in a way that he kind of isn't right now.
Yeah, him driving from a standstill and having to create in that type of situation can be pretty dicey. The first clip that you have there against the Wizards, it's a right to left cross, and the list of Pacers who can dribble with their left hand proficiently isn't very long, and It's kind of, I mean, coincidentally, like Andrew Nemhard's a right-handed player, but they run a lot of action for him to get to his left. So he's one person that doesn't necessarily apply to. And then Benedict tends to do his jab and go from the right to the left on the move to shift his defender. But Nesmith, Kendall Brown, Nwora, a lot of guys that don't quite have their left hand fully developed in order to maneuver through defense. But the other clip that you have there against the Jazz, when he kind of loses it with his right, something that I think that would help Aaron Nesmith, especially because he plays so much off the ball and is mainly a spot up guy. Kelly Olynyk's way too low there. So if you catch that on the curl fill, so what I mean there is instead of stopping his momentum at the 3-point line and catching it, you would continue your momentum and kind of curl into the catch. You would have a little bit more of an advantage where his handle wouldn't be as prohibitive for him there, where he might be able to still get downhill anyways. So that's something that maybe he should work on over the summer. But yeah, I mean, with Aaron, I kind of expected that the numbers were going to shake out a little bit differently for him, because I felt like if we think about his kind of most iconic play this year where he got past Evan Mobley at the first level in the corner and then dunked on Jarrett Allen, I kind of suspected that the shift to him at the 4 would be good for him because he'd be able to beat slower forwards more easily than he could against guards. But the numbers didn't reflect that. When he was defended by forwards, he shot 53% on twos, and when he was defended by guards, he shot 59% on twos. So he kind of has somewhat similar to Oshae in that he can struggle to adjust against verticality when he gets into the paint. He does not get a lot of elevation. So something that I think for him is going to be really important is mastering his reads on closeouts and whether he should be attacking right or left, because sometimes I don't think he necessarily makes the right decision in those situations. And then kind of simplifying some of his finishes. Sometimes I think he can overcomplicate things, and that makes it harder for him because he's not a quick rip guy, and he doesn't have a lot of elite vertical burst when he gets into the paint either. So for him, it's really about the reads when he's seeing those closeouts, because he is mainly going to be somebody who plays in spot up situations.
One more break here, guys, so I can talk to you about PrizePicks Daily Fantasy Made Easy, and they're doing a new $1 million daily Superflex promotion during the NBA playoffs. Every day of the playoffs, one PrizePicks user will win a chance at becoming a millionaire. One entry placed after 8 a.m. Eastern will be randomly selected each day. Whoever placed that entry will be given a 6-pick flex with the following payouts. If you pick 6 correct, you get $1 million. 5, you get $80,000. 4, you get $16,000. Full details can be found at prizepicks.com/million. You must opt in at that link to be eligible for the entry. And once you opt in, all you got to do is play the game like normal. All you got to do on PrizePicks, pick 2 to 6 players where they score more or less in their PrizePicks projection. You get to 25 times your money on any entry. It's just you versus their projections. It's safe. It's fast. You can get your money quickly. You can do it in a minute or less, and it's operational in tons of places. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com. Sign up, play daily fantasy sports. If you use the promo code LOCKDOWN, you'll get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100. You deposit $100, they'll give you $100. You deposit $50, they'll give you $50. But don't forget to use that promo code LOCKDOWN at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100 with PrizePicks Daily Fantasy Made Easy. I think, did I send you my Google Doc by accident? This is uncanny because finishing is, I cheated. I have 2 stats. The finishing in general is one of them. 32 for 89 from 4 to 14 feet this season. This is from PPP stats. 97 for 166 at the rim, which is 4 feet and in. That's 50.5% from 14 feet. And that's fine. A little bit better finishing, like all this stuff this is what I was talking about, where it's like he did so many things well that made him a needed piece, and they started him rightly all season and things like that. Where it's just like if he was a tick better at this, he would add so much more to the group season. He just needs to be a little bit better of a finisher, I think.
Yeah, and I think this is probably somewhat what lends credence to what Kevin Pritchard said at his end-of-game presser, where he said he's not sure if he's a starter or not. And some of that goes back to, if you are going to start Benedict and you want to keep Andrew Nembhard in the starting lineup and eventually address the 4 spot with more size, that is going to naturally crunch Aaron Nesmith out of the rotation. But also what you're saying, I think, is true. If he was just like 10% better in some of these certain areas, given that he is going to be somebody that plays away from the action, it would make it easier to be like, yeah, he can be your starter. He can be the person that starts at the 3. And then maybe you do bring Andrew Nembhard off the bench as like your backup point guard. But until it gets there, I think, yeah, what you're saying, I think cleaning the glass has him in like the 18th percentile for his position and finishing at the rim. So that's something that's definitely going to have to get better. And then something that we didn't even touch on, and maybe you are going to bring it up as your over under. So I hope I don't
Ooh,
spoil what you're going to pick, but his
okay.
foul rate, his foul rate,
It's
because
not.
he did a lot of good things for the Pacers defensively, but he struggles to finish those types of plays without fouling because can be very aggressive on the ball and keep guys in front, but then he can get a little bit handsy. So he was in the 5th percentile of foul rate for wings. Our 4th percentile, I'm sorry, 5.3% foul rate. And then just on shooting fouls, the only person who committed more shooting fouls per 100 possessions, or two people who did, were Jalen and Miles. And you would tend to see that from rim protectors committing more shooting
Right.
fouls than somebody on the wing. And Aaron was at 3.53. So a lot of loose ball fouls for him and a lot of shooting fouls for him that made it hard to keep him on the floor at times because he would pick up early fouls and then they would pull him to preserve some of that. So that's another area of improvement for him that he's going to have to work on.
Yeah, offensively as effective he was as a shooter. I just the crux of my clip and numbers argument was just one other thing to make you a weapon in some way. Defensively, I did have a number for this too, and I think this could partially be why his foul rate's so high. I don't know if you use B-ball index very much, but they have a matchup difficulty rating based on how often a player spends guarding a player who's, their offensive all-in-one metric is really high. Nesmith, 18th in the league in matchup difficulty, guarded very talented players all season, 97.7th percentile. I should just say 98th, but hey, why not say 97.7th? Like, he guarded other good players a lot, and he did fairly well with that, although he also fouled a lot because he was guarding those good players. So, like, he was the Pacers' best option. He did fairly well at that, at guarding players like that. So that's good that they have someone who is okay at that, even if it's not who you'd like dream if you're the Pacers when you're at your best, is the guy guarding the other team's best player all the time.
Yeah, and I don't know what his matchup versatility numbers were exactly. I don't have that in front of me. But if I were to guess, like, he and Nembhard were routinely drawing the top assignments, but Nembhard was typically the person that got put on the best perimeter player, whereas Nesmith was getting, like you're saying, getting matched up against bigger forwards and sometimes even centers, because probably my favorite game from him this year, and not that it was necessarily a great option, but it did look better than what else they did, was that late season game against Philadelphia where he scored over 20. And then by the third quarter, they take a timeout and they tell him, hey, go out there and front Joel Embiid, because they were very proactive. They didn't want Miles to rack up fouls early. So they were really squeezing Embiid at the nail and bringing in help. But then Tyrese Maxey was getting loose. Embiid was making great passes out of it. They're like, this isn't working. So they tried to go back to single coverage with Miles at the start of the third quarter, and Miles wasn't being able to hang with him. So they took a timeout. Like I said, they had Aaron Nesmith front him, and Aaron's, scrapping and clawing as best as he possibly can, deserves like a role player award for that. But he is going to pick up fouls when you're trying to, as good as Embiid is at drawing fouls, and he did end up picking up some there. But I think, there's games where he's playing against the Bulls and he's guarding Vucevic, not the center position, in part because they want to be able to keep guys low. They don't want to have Miles out there guarding in the pick and pop position. But, he guarded centers on a fairly routine basis, and sometimes those adjustments were pretty key. Up in Toronto, they switched Nesmith onto Pirtle at the end of the fourth quarter to try to take Toronto out of what they wanted to do with the pick and roll with, Mathurin guarding at the point of attack in that particular game against Fred. And that was pretty effective for them as well. But yeah, that might lead to some of the fouling too, because he was guarding up a position, sometimes all the way up to the 5 in a lot of games. So maybe if, he's able to guard more on the perimeter, that ticks down. But this still also showed up in summer league, and they weren't using him that way. Like, if he would have been playing regular minutes in summer league, he probably would have fouled out on most of those games. So
For a team that's been searching for any sort of wing defense for the last couple of years, it was pretty refreshing to see what he can do switching and with foot speed and guarding awesome players. Even though he's not amazing at it, having an option is better than having the no options that they had for so long, which is why I wanted to dig in. I did this poorly. I went into the matchup difficulty thing thinking it was going to be high. I was like, I'm going to use this number if it's high. And it was. I shouldn't do that. I should go in with more of an open mind there. My over-under goes back to the offensive end, talking about counters to shooting. This season, 0.81. That was Aaron Nesmith's dribbles per touch. Does that number exceed 1 next season?
If he moves to the bench, maybe. If Matherin's in the starting lineup and Nesmith slides back to the bench, and let's say that the bench is TJ McConnell and Chris Duarte and Nesmith and Jalen Smith, maybe they give him opportunity to do a little bit more off the dribble, but I'm not super bullish on that. Like, I think a lot would have to develop for Aaron for you to want to give those types of reps to him. Because, I mean, I don't want to just jump right into Nwora, but we saw over the back end of the season, and I wrote a whole article about this, about how they were running a specific play where TJ would give the ball to Nwora in bench lineups and then cut off the elbow and go to the strong side corner. And then Nwora would dribble to the full side of the court, and that would create a single side tag on the backside. And Nwora was very good at playmaking out of that and finding the shooter on the backside. Like, you're not going to, there's nobody else at the 4 spot on the roster who's going to do that. Like, there's not really a clear reason for the Pacers to be like, hey, let's run that exact same play for Aaron Nesmith at the 4, because you're just not going to get the same productivity. So I think I will probably take the under, but I mean, I would be pleasantly surprised if it ends up being the over. Or maybe that would be an indictment of roster construction if it ends up being the over. I don't know.
Maybe so. So post All-Star break, when a lot of the talk, and this is mostly just because of who it was obvious they were going to, was like, Matherin's role's bigger and Nembhard's role's bigger and Nwora's role's bigger, and all these guys, they have more responsibility. They're doing more with the ball. Nesmith quietly had a little bit higher usage in that stretch too, even though it was rightly under discussed because of the other 3 guys. But even post All-Star break, when Nesmith was in, like, for him in the NBA, like the ideal situation for him to have touches where he can do stuff, 0.94 dribbles per touch, right? Still below 1. So I'd be surprised if it gets over 1, but I think if it does, that would be reflective of growth that he maybe needs to be a little bit more of a connector on the offensive end next season. But you're on a roll with these transitions today. So take us to Jordan Nwora, who was awesome, quite frankly, after the trade last year.
Yeah, so I didn't want to use that exact same play. I almost wanted to, just because I do think that it differentiates him from what you get from Brissett and Nesmith and Kendall Brown. I don't think you're getting that from any of the other 3 guys, but since I did write an entire article about it, I didn't want to look as though I didn't put the work in for this, which I definitely did. So unfortunately, we are looking at an area of improvement instead for Nwora here, because for the many good things that I think that he did for the Pacers offensively, the defense is going to have to get a lot better. So I've titled this, it is a little bit of a clip package. Hopefully you got all 3 clips combined into one. I've titled it Possessions Hunted, and this includes on the ball and away from the ball. So the very first clip against the Knicks here, you're going to see that it's just Emmanuel quickly calling Nwora up into a screen and then drilling the step back 3, which the Knicks in that penultimate game that they played against New York, that was pretty much nonstop their game plan. Was just find wherever Nwora was and put him into screening action. So the Pacers weren't blitzing that for whatever reason after the switch. They didn't go to get the ball out of Quickly's hands. Instead, they just kind of have Nembhard playing passive help at the nail. And then that's, it's a problem because Nwora's not going to be able to stick with a guy like that. So then in Toronto, the Raptors in the third quarter were doing what some teams will do to try to punish switching teams, which is have the forward come set a screen, which in that case I think was OG Anunoby, so that you're getting Nwora on ball against Fred VanVleet, and then call for a screen from the center so that you're forcing Nwora to have to navigate a screen. So he already turns his body parallel, like he's going to ice the screen, and then Poeltl very wisely adjusts the angle, and he cannot get around at that point in time. So instead of at that point, it needs to be a late switch. So he needs to run the seam in front of Poeltl, and he kind of just does nothing. And that puts Jalen Smith in a really bad position where he's having to guard 2 players at once, and then Nesmith's having to rotate over late, and Poeltl ends up getting a shot right at the rim and an and one. And then in the final game against Dallas, and this is why it isn't just putting him in on-ball actions, it's Kyrie Irving has the ball on the wing while he's being guarded by Mathurin, and then there ends up being a pin down. TJ McConnell motions for Nwora to switch on to Christian Wood, and Nwora doesn't end up doing it, and Christian Wood gets a wide open shot at the rim where Nwora is just kind of trailing behind, and then McConnell ends up having some words for him after that because it's pretty poor. So in order for him to be a consistent part of the rotation and somebody that you would see being on, like, I'm not saying the Pacers are going to be in a contender, but in playoff position, the defense is going to have to get better.
Agreed. I was just watching the Dallas one again. Poor Jalen Smith got the butt of that one in the end. Something I said to, I can't remember who it was in Media Row, but something I said to someone about Jordan Nwora in the middle of March was like, he plays really upright on the defensive end, right? Like he's very vertical, and I think that makes it easier to get by him. And makes it look like he just can't stop anybody. And all the three of these kind of show that no matter what the situation is, it's kind of harder for him just one, stop anybody with the ball, but two, like be a useful team defender when he's so upright. And at his exit interview, no one really usually says this, but someone asked him, it might have been me, what he's going to work on this offseason. He said conditioning. And I was like, oh, that's a unique and rare answer. And maybe that's part of it, is that he just wasn't in shape to be able to exert himself offensively and be in a stance a full game defensively. But that was something like on that end of the floor, he just got picked on so much. And I think part of it was he's very, very upright on that end of the floor.
Yeah, because I mean, like I said, this is 3 different ways to target him. There were certain matchups, like strangely enough, they put him on Luka in that game in Dallas, and he had some okay contests, but in part that's because, Luka's more the methodical, decelerate type guy that makes it a little bit easier if you're a big body to stay in front, despite how skilled Luka is versus, the burstiness of Quickly or Fred VanVleet in these situations, because even late against OKC, he was able to stay in front of Josh Giddey. But again, Josh Giddey isn't like a guy with a lot of wiggle or who's going to snatch back in those types of situations where Nwora can kind of more struggle. But even to your point, like I think it was around the second game that he played for the Pacers. I'm not sure how many games into it after being traded that they played the Magic, but he was very straight up and down and got pretty much overwhelmed like a tidal wave by both Banchero and Bol in that game, and then kind of got confused too, where he was picking up full court. I want to say against Suggs, and you could tell that Ronald Norad was like, "What is happening here? Why are you the person pressuring the inbounds pass?" And that also ended very poorly. So, but to your point, yeah, I remember him saying that when you guys asked those questions about the conditioning and him talking about how hard it was to come over and kind of be playing at that degree of pace, which is interesting because it wasn't like the Bucks played at a really slow pace. Like the Pacers were 4th in average time to shoot. The Bucks were 11th. The Pacers were 4th in transition frequency. The Bucks were 8th. But he was playing a lot more minutes while also doing this at a faster pace. So, and doing things more so than what he had done before. Because like I said, I won't bring up that pick and roll play again, but if you just look at his numbers, like his transition frequency with the Bucks of the plays that he used was 14.9%. With the Pacers, it was 28.3%. And he wasn't super efficient in those transition looks. And then pick and roll wise, he went from 10% with the Bucks up to 12.8%. So there was an increase in him doing more things as, a primary initiator, as well as getting up and down the floor over more minutes. So it is possible that maybe that did drain some from him defensively. But like I said, like he's going to have to become more of a two-way player, because when you think about it, like what we were just talking about earlier, I'll ask you this and what your thoughts are. If it is Benedict and Nembhard and Tyrese and whoever they find to fit at the 4 spot, whether that's in the draft or free agency or a trade, and then Miles Turner, if Nesmith slides back to the bench, where does Nwora's role cleanly fit with the rest of the roster? And would if it was up to you to pick in the rotation off the bench between Nesmith and Nwora, who would you pick to play in the rotation?
I'd pick Nesmith. I mean, I think you need the defense, especially given that that is the starting trio that you've chosen. And Nwora maybe is a fine 10th guy there, because you just need a backup center behind Miles and then Buddy and TJ or whoever. Like there's a lot that could happen this summer, right? Like it's not rocket science to figure that out. But yeah, it is hard to find a role that makes a ton of sense for him, especially if they are getting that 4 that they have so craved for so long. And that makes all the sense in the world for them to target that position. So maybe their starting lineup looks a little different and there's a spot for him somewhere, but it feels like at best he's kind of their 10th man next year, right? Is that safe to say?
Well, yeah, because unless they make other changes off the bench, you're looking at TJ, you're looking at Buddy. Is Chris Duarte still part of this rotation?
Yet, right?
Like you're looking at TJ, Buddy, Chris, and Nesmith, and Jalen Smith / Ijax. So there is a crunch there. I mean, I like the things that they saw from Nwora. There was other things that I didn't even talk about. Like he was surprised me as a connective passer. He was very good on the 45 cuts, just like Brissett is. He crashed the offensive glass. Like the Pacers are pretty aggressive on missed threes of sending wings to the glass and getting putbacks. He was pretty decent at that. Like his game was more than just, having that 25-point quarter against the Atlanta Hawks. There was other things that he brings to the table. So I don't mind at all that they made that trade and they'll still have him around. I'm just not exactly clear where the rotation spot will be unless there's other changes, because I, like you, would probably side with Aaron Nesmith over Nwora at this point if it was just a head-to-head choice.
Yeah, they got him. They got him for free, basically. You do that. You do that every time, but Yeah, next year specifically. And it's like he's expiring on a $4 billion, whatever it is deal. It's like not the, it's not like you're like, we have to find a role for him, but he would be valuable. Like he would provide a scoring option at the 4 that Nesmith doesn't, but I think I'd lean to the defensive side there.
And, maybe because he is an expiring contract, maybe that offers you something in a matching type situation too, as well, if there's trades available. And especially because he did play better once he came over in the trade and showed that he could do a few more things. So like we said, as Kevin Pritchard said, the Pacers have a lot of options in front of them.
The numbers game just doesn't make sense to me.
I guess I should actually share what the things that I picked for Nwora are instead of just like going on and on. So yeah, the one number was the 12.8%, which I already referenced, was his possessions as the pick and roll ball handler. And I mainly picked that because I think that that's something unique that he provides over the other guys. And then, yeah, so we kind of already touched on this too. I had 3.5, which is the number of / wing players ahead of him in the rotation next season. And both of us kind of just covered that, but I'll let you say what you think.
Well, now we have to define a wing-esque player.
Exactly.
to that question,
so guys that you would play at the 3 or the 4, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, I'll probably take the over, but it's close. I mean, if Oshae is, what do you count Andrew, and Benedict as? Neither of them count, do they?
I'm not counting them necessarily. No, I mean, I guess I'm thinking Chris, Nesmith, Buddy.
Oh, if Buddy's in that group, then I'll definitely take the over. Yeah.
I mean, it depends because the Pacers were so fluid with where they played all of these people, but it's just, I guess it's just spot in the rotation, which we already kind of said he'd be a 10th, maybe 11th guy.
A lot of the guys that fit into this group are also in that expiring contract camp of maybe this makes sense to do something. I don't know. It's just, it's so hard to predict where a lot of this could end up. And they could win the lottery in whatever from now, and then all of a sudden, even what I thought could happen changes completely. So it's I would guess over 3.5 because that seems like what their priority will be this summer. But it's really hard to say what their goals will be if certain things go certain ways.
Well, yeah, because we'll still have a whole Chris Duarte episode, but just talking about where his place is with the team is a whole nother discussion, and whether he would actually be ahead of the rotation or still on the roster next year. So. Lots of things up in the air. But that's all I have for Jordan Nwora, and that's our last guy for this episode, unless you had something else that you wanted to talk about in reference to him or anybody else.
I really enjoyed watching him, which is strange. I can't explain it, but just he's an aesthetically nice offensive player, I think. Shots go in and makes when Rick Carlisle said, "Oh, we're looking for chances for him to play make," I was like, "What?" Jordan Nwora, I don't think I've watched him a ton, but enough that I was stunned he said that, and that was the right call. He did fine in those instances, ran a few pick and rolls. So it's weird that now that you've made me really think about it, I'm like, yeah, I mean, he probably won't be in the rotation, but he still did enough that I am intrigued by what he can do.
I concur as well. And if people want to read that article, it's interesting. I think it's called Jordan Nwora and the Very Good Almost Always Works Play or something along that lines. I'm not exactly sure what the title was, but it's chin 4 is what they call it for him when they run it, and it creates a single side tag. And I also think that brings up stuff from a broader NBA perspective on how whether what we term as strong and weak side should be more so termed in terms of single side and full side, and how that affects tagging responsibilities. So there is a broader NBA application over just, Nwora coming over in a trade and some things that I saw from that play. So I was surprised as you were to see him do more in a playmaking role. And if he does find a way into the rotation because they move other guys around, I'd certainly be interested in seeing more from him as well.
What do you think happened to Alexander in his adult life after his terrible, horrible, no good, very bad
day? I hope his days got better, Tony. I hope they did.
I can't believe, I haven't thought of that book in forever, but when you put that headline out, I remembered the full title of the book and what the cover was and a couple of the pages. I'm like, how does my memory suppress those things until the moment I don't need them? Next time you see us, we'll be doing Miles Turner's season review. I'm very excited for that one. What a fun season.
That's going to be a fun one. I'm looking forward to that episode.
It is. It really is. Just the way he really did what he's always said he could do. A lot of players say a lot of stuff. Sometimes players don't do what they say they're going to do. The way he did it, very impressive to me. A lot of other stuff coming on Locked On Pacers this week, but guests TBD, so I'm not going to spoil them. Kalen, do you have anything else today?
No, nothing else to add. Hopefully you guys aren't sick of seeing me on Tony's YouTube channel yet. I've littered a lot of episodes here, and I'm still going to be around for a few more. So
The audio people are definitely not sick of it. Certainly, the YouTube people get sick of me very quickly. So they just don't like people. Is my take here. I should have just let you say this. Patreon.com/basketball she wrote. Talk about it for a second.
Right. So my Twitter handle at C2_Cooper. If you go there, the link to the Patreon is very clean and easy to get there. It is patreon.com/basketball she wrote. And we'll have the clips that Tony and I discussed, as well as the numbers listed there. I have a comment section. If you want to list it and tell us how wrong we are, you can do it there or in the YouTube comments, as some of you already have. And that way it will be clean and easy for you to follow along as well.
And Kalen also, I believe, currently taking mailbag questions. If you'd like to be featured,
I am.
In a post or have your question about the Pacers answered. Thank you guys a ton for listening. We'll see you soon. Have a fantastic day.